Growing up, I learned one painful lesson before I was old enough to understand what it meant. In my family, love was something you earned, not something you were given. And no matter how hard I tried, my younger brother Tyler always seemed to earn more of it. Tyler was fearless, athletic, and charismatic. He won football games, graduated near the top of his class, and eventually fulfilled his childhood dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. Every achievement was celebrated like a national holiday. My mother framed every certificate, posted every milestone on social media, and proudly told anyone who would listen, "My son is one of America's finest." I was never jealous of Tyler's success. I was proud of him. What hurt was realizing that my own life had become invisible. When people asked what I did for work, my mother would shrug dramatically. "Oh, Ethan, he has some boring government desk job, nothing exciting." I would simply smile and let the conversation move on. Correcting her wasn't an option. The truth belonged behind locked doors, encrypted servers, and signed security agreements. Even if I wanted to explain, I legally couldn't. For nearly 15 years, I'd worked inside one of the most classified intelligence programs in the country. My responsibilities weren't something that could be described over dinner or shared during family holidays. The only thing most people inside the military community knew was a call sign, 187. Outside those circles, it meant absolutely nothing. Inside them, it was spoken quietly. That anonymity was intentional. The people I worked beside believed that the mission mattered more than the person. Recognition wasn't part of the job description. If everything went perfectly, no one outside the room would ever know we existed. I accepted that years ago. What I hadn't accepted was becoming the family disappointment. I stopped attending holidays after one particularly miserable Thanksgiving when my mother spent an entire dinner comparing my life to Tyler's military accomplishments. "Ethan never finishes anything exciting." She'd laughed while carving the turkey. "Meanwhile, Tyler jumps out of airplanes for a living." Everyone laughed. Even Tyler. I smiled, finished my meal, and quietly left before dessert. That was 5 years ago. Since then, birthdays came and went without phone calls. Christmas cards stopped arriving. Family reunions happened without invitations. Honestly, life became quieter. Peaceful, even. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing intelligence reports in a secure conference room. It was my Aunt Linda. "Ethan," she said warmly, "your mother is throwing Tyler a huge celebration this Saturday. He's receiving another commendation, and the whole family will be there." I remained silent. "I know things haven't been easy," she continued gently, "but families deserve second chances." I almost laughed. Second chances usually came after someone admitted they were wrong. No one in my family ever had. Still, Aunt Linda had always treated me with kindness. "I'll think about it," I told her. After ending the call, I stared at the dark screen for several minutes. Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation. Another part wondered if enough time had passed for things to be different. Maybe people matured. Maybe resentment faded. Maybe my mother had realized how much her words had hurt. By Friday evening, curiosity won. I drove 3 hours to my hometown, checking into a small hotel instead of staying at my parents' house. Old habits die hard. Saturday afternoon, I pulled into the familiar neighborhood where I had grown up. The house looked exactly the same, except for one new addition. A massive banner stretched across the front yard. "Congratulations to our hero, Tyler." American flags lined the walkway. Red, white, and blue balloons floated from the mailbox. Luxury cars already filled both sides of the street. My mother had turned the party into a neighborhood event. As I walked toward the front door, I could already hear laughter pouring from inside. The moment I stepped into the house, conversations paused. Some relatives smiled politely. Others looked surprised that I'd actually come. Then my mother spotted me from across the living room. She walked over, looked me up and down, and forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Well," she announced loudly enough for half the room to hear, "look who finally decided to show up." Several guests turned toward us. She wrapped one arm around Tyler's shoulder, beaming with pride. "Our Navy SEAL made time for his family," she said proudly before glancing at me. "And Ethan, well, I guess he found a free afternoon between filing paperwork." The room erupted with uncomfortable laughter. I forced a small smile, just as I always had. Some battles weren't worth fighting. At least, that's what I believed. I had no idea that before the evening was over, a single word, 187, would change everything and leave the very people laughing at me speechless. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 2, 600 words, where Ethan endures even harsher public humiliation before an unexpected military commander recognizes him. The first hour of the party passed exactly the way I expected. I became invisible. Clusters of relatives filled the backyard, laughing over barbecue and cold drinks, while patriotic music drifted through hidden speakers. Children ran across the lawn waving miniature American flags, and every conversation eventually circled back to one subject. "Tyler, my grandson is a real American hero," my grandfather proudly told anyone who would listen. "I hear he completed one of the toughest missions overseas," an uncle added. Mom soaked in every compliment as though they were meant for her. She had decorated the backyard with framed photos of Tyler in uniform, newspaper clippings about his graduation, and a large table displaying medals, challenge coins, and military memorabilia. Anyone walking into the yard would have thought the celebration was for a decorated general, instead of a young SEAL celebrating his latest commendation. I couldn't blame Tyler for that. He looked embarrassed by some of the attention, though he never asked Mom to stop. I stayed near the edge of the patio, sipping iced tea and speaking only when someone approached me. Most didn't. Eventually my cousin Rachel wandered over. "It's good to see you," she said quietly. "I was hoping you'd come." I smiled. "Thanks. Are you doing okay?" "I'm fine." She studied me for a moment before lowering her voice. "You know how Aunt Susan is." I chuckled softly. "Unfortunately, yes." Before Rachel could say anything else, my mother's voice echoed across the yard. Ethan, heads turned immediately. She stood near the buffet table, waving dramatically for me to come over. I already knew this wasn't going to end well. When I reached the crowd, she wrapped an arm around Tyler and smiled at the guests. "Everyone," she announced proudly, "I'd like to introduce both of my sons." Polite applause followed. "This," she said, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder, "is Lieutenant Tyler Brooks, a United States Navy SEAL." Another round of applause erupted. Then she pointed toward me, "And this is Ethan." She paused just long enough for people to expect something more. "He's still trying to figure life out." Scattered laughter broke out. Someone awkwardly looked away. Another person coughed into his drink. Mom wasn't finished. "I always tell people I had one son who became a warrior," she said with a grin. "And another who became a professional paperwork organizer." Even Tyler laughed this time, not loudly. Just enough, it stung more than I wanted to admit. Mom folded her arms. "So, Ethan," she asked loudly, "what exactly do you do these days?" Still pushing papers for the government. Every eye landed on me. The truthful answer wasn't an option. "I work with a good team," I replied calmly. She rolled her eyes. "Listen to that. Even now he can't give a straight answer." More laughter. "I bet your office chair has seen more action than you have." The joke earned another wave of chuckles. I simply smiled. Years ago, I would have argued. Years ago, I would have begged her to understand that silence didn't equal failure. Now, I was just tired. Tyler finally spoke. "You know," he said, trying to sound playful, "if you ever want to wear a real uniform, I could probably get you a recruiting brochure." Several guests laughed harder than before. I looked at my younger brother. There wasn't cruelty in his eyes. Only confidence. He honestly believed he had accomplished everything while I had done nothing. I couldn't even blame him. He had spent years hearing the same story. Just as another joke was about to begin, the front door opened. The room gradually quieted. 3 men in dress military uniforms entered the house. Their ribbons and insignias immediately drew attention. One was a Navy captain. Another wore the insignia of a senior special operations commander. The third, an older man with calm gray eyes, carried himself with quiet authority that needed no introduction. Tyler straightened instinctively, so did I. Military professionals recognize presence long before they recognize rank. Mom hurried forward, practically glowing. "Oh my goodness! You actually came!" She eagerly introduced Tyler, praising every achievement she could remember. The officers congratulated him politely. Then the older commander stopped talking. His eyes shifted past everyone else in the room toward me. For a brief second, his expression changed from polite conversation to complete disbelief. He took 2 slow steps closer. The laughter around the party faded into uneasy silence. The commander studied my face carefully before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Permission to address you." He paused. 187. The nickname hit the room like a thunderclap. I gave a small nod. Permission granted. The commander's posture instantly stiffened. Behind him, the other 2 officers exchanged stunned glances. One of them quietly whispered, "It really is him." Across the room, Tyler's confident smile disappeared. For the first time that afternoon, he wasn't looking at me like an older brother who had failed. He was staring at me like a soldier who had just heard the name of a ghost. The backyard fell so quiet that I could hear the wind rustling the American flags along the fence. Every conversation stopped. Even the children seemed to sense something had changed. The older commander stepped toward me, his posture rigid with respect. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he extended his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person, sir." I accepted the handshake with a polite smile. "The honor is mine, Captain." Behind him, the other 2 officers stood almost instinctively at attention. Tyler's eyes widened. He had trained for years under some of the finest military instructors in the country. Yet he had never seen officers of this caliber greet someone with such obvious respect unless that person had earned it many times over. My mother laughed nervously. "Oh, you gentlemen must know Ethan from some government office." No one answered her. Instead, the captain looked toward Tyler. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said calmly, "your service record is outstanding. You should be proud." Tyler nodded. "Thank you, sir." The captain continued, "But if not for the man standing beside you, several of the operations that made your career possible would never have succeeded." Tyler blinked. "I'm sorry, sir." The older commander folded his hands behind his back. "You've heard the call sign 187, haven't you?" Tyler's face changed instantly. Every Navy SEAL had. During training, instructors occasionally mentioned mysterious intelligence support that had prevented ambushes, uncovered hidden explosives, or located hostages before assault teams arrived. The name was never explained. It simply appeared in classified briefings whenever impossible missions somehow became survivable. No one knew who or what 187 actually was. Most recruits assumed it referred to a special operations unit. Others believed it was an artificial intelligence program. Some even joked that 187 was just a military myth created to boost morale. Tyler swallowed hard. "Everyone's heard of 187. The commander slowly turned toward me. And now you know." Tyler stared at me, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "No." His voice barely escaped his lips. "That's impossible." I remained silent. The captain smiled faintly. "It isn't impossible." He looked around at the gathered guests. "The man you've been teasing all afternoon coordinated intelligence that has protected American service members across multiple theaters of operation for more than a decade." The room was frozen. My aunt covered her mouth. My grandfather lowered his eyes. Several relatives looked at my mother, whose confident smile had completely vanished. She forced another laugh. "So, Ethan works with intelligence," the commander answered gently. "He leads some of the people intelligence depends on." He paused. "Much of what he has accomplished remains classified. Some of his highest honors cannot even be discussed publicly." The words seemed almost unreal. I wished they would stop. Recognition had never been comfortable. I preferred staying in the background. The captain continued anyway. "There are families across this country whose sons and daughters came home alive because 1, 8, 7 saw something others missed." He looked directly at Tyler. "There's a very good chance you're one of them." Tyler's breathing became uneven. Fragments of old mission briefings flashed through his mind, coordinates that had changed at the last minute, enemy positions discovered moments before an assault, entire operations redirected because of intelligence from an unidentified source. Each report carried the same designation. His eyes filled with disbelief. "My team." He looked at me. "Those missions." I gave a small nod. "Some of them." Tyler lowered his head. He wasn't crying, not yet, but his confidence, the pride that had carried him through the afternoon, had completely disappeared. Across the yard, my mother stood perfectly still. Her face had turned pale. For years she had introduced me as the son who pushed papers. She had laughed at my silence. She had mistaken humility for failure. Now she realized that the son she had mocked in front of everyone was being quietly honored by the very military leaders she had hoped would praise Tyler. No one laughed anymore. No one spoke. The only sound came when Tyler took 2 slow steps toward me. His voice cracked. All those years. He struggled to find the words. "You let us believe you were nobody." I looked at my younger brother with the same calm expression I had worn all evening. "I never needed the world to know who I was," I said softly. "I only needed the people I helped to make it home." For the first time in his life, Tyler wasn't standing in the shadow of a legend. He was standing beside one, and the realization left the entire family speechless. No one knew what to say. The laughter that had echoed through the backyard only minutes earlier had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence. My mother stood frozen beside the dessert table, still holding the serving spoon she had forgotten to put down. For the first time in my life, she had no clever remark, no sarcastic joke, and no comparison to make. Tyler looked at me with eyes full of disbelief. I don't understand," he whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I took a slow breath before answering. "Because I couldn't." The senior commander nodded in agreement. "Mr. Brooks signed agreements that most people will never even see. Much of his career remains classified. He protected missions by protecting his identity." Another officer added quietly, "Some heroes wear medals, others carry secrets." Several relatives lowered their heads in shame. My Aunt Linda wiped tears from her eyes. "I always knew there was more to Ethan than people realized," she said softly. My father, who had remained silent throughout the party, finally stepped forward. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. "Ethan," his voice trembled. "I'm sorry." 2 simple words. They were the first genuine apology I had ever heard from him. "I should have defended you years ago." I gave him a small smile. "You should have." He nodded, unable to argue. Then Tyler walked toward me, the proud Navy SEAL who had spent the afternoon joking about my desk job, now looked like a little brother again. "I'm ashamed of myself," he admitted. "I spent years believing Mom's version of you. I thought you didn't care about serving your country." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "You earned your trident, Tyler. You risked your life for others. Be proud of that. But I laughed at you. I know." And you still helped people like me. I nodded. That was my job. Tears welled in Tyler's eyes. Without another word, he stood perfectly straight and raised his hand in a crisp military salute. Every guest watched in silence. I returned the salute, not because he owed it to me, but because he had earned my respect by admitting he was wrong. Then came the moment I never expected. My mother slowly walked toward us. Gone was the confident woman who had spent years boasting about her favorite son. In her place stood someone overwhelmed by regret. Ethan. Her voice barely carried across the yard. I'm so sorry. I looked at her quietly. I spent years humiliating you. She began crying. I thought you were wasting your life. You never asked. I replied gently. I judged you? Yes. I compared you to Tyler every chance I got. Yes. She covered her face. I don't know how to fix this. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered with complete honesty. You can't erase the past. She looked up. But you can choose who you become tomorrow. She nodded through tears. I'd like the chance. I hope you earn it. There was no anger in my voice, no shouting, no insults. That was the revenge she expected. Instead, I gave her something much harder to live with: the truth. Respect cannot be demanded, love cannot be forced, and pride means very little when it comes at the cost of someone else's dignity. Just then, the commander's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen before slipping it back into his pocket. He looked at me. It appears they're ready. I understood immediately. Duty never waited. The commander smiled. Whenever you're ready, 187. I picked up my jacket. Before I reached the gate, something incredible happened. Tyler stood at attention once more. Then the 3 senior officers did the same. One by one, every active, duty service member and veteran at the party followed. A long line of salutes stretched across the backyard, not because I had asked for recognition, but because they understood what silent service meant. I paused, returned the salute one final time, and walked toward the waiting black SUV without looking back. Months later, a handwritten letter arrived at my apartment. It was from Tyler. He wrote that he no longer wanted to be known as the family's hero. He simply wanted to be my brother again. At the bottom of the page, he had written one final sentence. The greatest warrior I ever met was the one who never needed anyone to know his name. I folded the letter with a smile. The years of ridicule had not been erased. Some wounds never completely heal. But my revenge had never been about humiliation. It was about truth. The same family who once laughed at the man with the boring desk job would forever remember the day they discovered that the quiet son they overlooked was the unseen guardian who had spent his life bringing heroes home. And that was more than enough.